Dark Circle, a provocative personal essay on life in the atomic age.
I was born in 1946, just after the first atomic bombs were dropped on Japan.
The film has been the subject of much acclaim and much controversy because of its strong point of view. Now see for yourself.
Dick, what materials are you handling here?
We're working with plutonium, which is a very toxic alpha emitter.
Why is it so hazardous?
Well, it's hazardous because it's extremely toxic. If it gets into the human system, it tends to concentrate in the bones and destroys the ability of the human body to make red blood cells.
About how much would it take to be toxic for a human worker?
Well, it isn't very much. The lifetime tolerance or body burden that's permitted for a human being is about 0.6 of a microgram. That's 0.6 of a millionth of a gram.
You know, it's a wonder to me that you can work with a substance that's so dangerous.
Well, it can be done by taking plenty of precautions and by being very careful.
The lesson, as summarized by one scientist, is this. If you are working with a radioactive substance, don't let it escape. If you let it escape into the atmosphere, it may come back to you.
Every year in the fall, in the first week of November, the black Brant take to the sky. Their bodies are built for speed and endurance. They fly non-stop from Alaska to Mexico, a distance of 3,600 miles, in 50 hours. In the spring, as they fly north, stopping along the California coast to rest and feed, they pass by 3 nuclear reactors, each within a few miles of an active earthquake fault. And I wonder if plutonium will eventually affect the Geese too, because this is where plutonium is created. In nuclear reactors. In every nuclear reactor. It's the only place plutonium is made. Nuclear reactors are the birthplace of plutonium.
So what we're going to do here now is continue walking, and we're about to go in the Unit 1 containment. You remember the reactor vessel, we fission nuclear fuel, fission uranium. In so doing, we generate some heat some water to make steam. And steam, in turn, turns the generator, and the generator makes electricity.
The reactor also makes plutonium. As the uranium fuel inside this core fissions and gives off heat, some of the uranium atoms are transformed into plutonium. A reactor this size will produce 1,000 megawatts of electricity, and every year, 500 pounds of plutonium. This material is commonly called radioactive waste, but it's also the raw material for atomic bombs. A plant the size of Diablo produces within its radioactive core enough plutonium every year to build 50 nuclear weapons. Plutonium and other radioactive elements might be released from Diablo if the reactor had a meltdown, an accident perhaps caused by the pipes breaking in the cooling system and a failure of the backup systems. 25 years before the accidental near meltdown at 3 Mile Island, the federal government had begun a series of planned experiments, destroying its own reactors in the desert.
These are closer views of the experiment. The film was partly fogged by radiation.
Coming up with power, 400 megawatts. We've reached the full power hole. Everything all right with you, CRS? Yes, looks good.
It is now F minus 90 seconds. Put on goggles or turn away.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fire.
This is not an atomic bomb. This is the actual explosion of an unshielded nuclear reactor, its radioactive core blown to pieces and scattered to the atmosphere. According to a study released by the state of California, the most severe meltdown at Diablo, coupled with wind and rain bringing radiation to San Luis Obispo, could cause 27,000 immediate deaths, without considering the long-term effects of plutonium.
We would like to get started.
A local group called the Mothers for Peace tried to stop construction of the plant, but at the federal hearings, they discovered certain restrictions.
Now, some of you we have met many times over the last 4.5 years. I'm still Elizabeth Bowers, still a lawyer, and I've now completed 26 years in federal administrative hearings.
Congress decided initially that nuclear power could be used to generate electricity, and it was a rational goal. So it's not a matter of our determining whether it is a sound policy to have nuclear power in the United States for the purpose of generating electricity. Our only purpose, really, is to decide whether this plant, the Diablo Canyon plants, units 1 and 2, can be operated in a manner that reasonably assures the public health and safety.
Even though both sides were represented, basic safety questions would never be discussed.
What we couldn't discuss is the fact that there's no way to store the waste from Diablo. We're not allowed to discuss that because it's a generic issue. It applies to all of the reactors. We cannot discuss the fact that there isn't adequate insurance. We are not allowed to discuss the fact that the emergency core cooling system has failed all of its scale model tests. So when you're playing their game, they're in total control. And if you look at the history of nuclear power in the federal government, you see that every reactor that's ever been built has been granted a license to operate. No matter what the objections are, no matter who the experts are that testify that the marine life will die, that there'll be cancer and leukemia, birth defects. And so you really begin to feel that you don't have any power, that you're just going through the motions.
Ray changed her tactics.
We've leafleted here for 4 months and our newspapers never covered it. Ever.
She started with the hardest group to convince, construction workers at the plant.
Hello, Ray. Have any of you seen the women who hand out the leaflets?
Oh, yeah. Every day. Well, Ray Fleming, she's the head of the Mothers for Peace, and they come up with these phony facts and phony figures all the time. Now, one little group like the Mothers for Peace are going to try to educate the public, and I don't think the public needs to be educated.
Do you have like a leaflet this morning? Okay.
Our workers built the world.
I agree, but we don't need nuclear power. It's about alternatives and jobs.
Get your goddamn shit out of here.
None of the equipment or material or structures here would fail or would be adversely affected by the earthquake. The people aren't objective where nuclear power is concerned. They're not willing to accept a level of risks that are below levels of risk that they accept every day as a matter of course in their everyday life. The real bottom line nature of the decision is it possible to design and build anything with a sufficient degree of certainty in its safety that you should go ahead and do it?
With each anniversary of the 3 Mile Island accident, more and more of the usually conservative elements of San Luis Obispo came out against Diablo Canyon. And while the Mothers for Peace appealed every decision made by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, 60 local groups from across California formed a coalition to organize large-scale, highly visible opposition to Diablo. In the beginning, Ray Fleming could not have predicted she'd be ordering porta potties for 30,000 people, or talking strategy with the California governor the day he came out against Diablo. In the end, there was no time for rallies or marches. Back at Diablo Canyon's main gate, the human blockade began.
You better have King Kong stand at that front gate, because I'm going to work Monday morning. You talk to Mothers of Peace, I got a mom at home, and if I don't go to work, there ain't gonna be no peace at home.
One last vote remained before the license would be granted and Diablo would start up, instantly becoming radioactive for thousands of years. The Abalone Alliance launched a blockade of all the entrances to Diablo Canyon, blocking the same workers they'd once been leafleting.
People being thrown out of the way into the fences.
Each blockader had been trained in nonviolence, and the coordinators maintained direct communication with the police.
And we also understand that this morning a CHP officer got out of his car and cocked his gun and pointed it at the people.
With the blockade in full force, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission convened in Washington for the final vote.
I wonder then if I might call for a vote that would authorize loading the fuel into the reactor for the first time and testing at low power levels.
On the basis of this order?
On the basis of this order, yes, sir.
Aye.
All is aye. Aye. I gather there are no nays.
5-0, they have authorized a low-power test license for the plant.
After nearly 10 years of opposition,
Let me think for a minute.
Ray found it hard to believe.
We're asking if the license has come down, and I just received a call from
Mark.
Okay.
his wife who are coming down this weekend to join the blockade.
Who did he verify the low-power testing license with?
We will be continuing the blockade. Which way is Brant?
That's what I heard, 5 Hope.
Okay.
But I really think we need to verify it before we give it out.
It's on the wire services, too.
Mark, they went on the wire services 10 times that Diablo was licensed and our blockade had
Called the
started.
commission in Washington.
The blockade continued, even though the license had been granted. Over a 2-week span, 600 officers made nearly 2,000 arrests. It became the longest, and in terms of arrests, the largest civil disobedience action in the history of U.S. nuclear power. With the main gate cleared and the last blockader in jail, Pacific Gas and Electric made final preparations to start the reactor. But then, at the last moment, PG&E publicly admitted a grave mistake. There are 2 reactors at Diablo, mirror images of each other. The blueprints for units 1 and 2 had gotten mixed up, and the earthquake supports for the cooling pipes, the same cooling system designed to prevent a meltdown, had been installed backwards. It was the first of hundreds of mistakes discovered later, all made on the $2.5 billion structure described by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission as the most highly analyzed building in the world. Embarrassed and furious, the NRC commissioners suspended Diablo Canyon's license indefinitely. For the first time in 10 years, Ray Fleming had some breathing room.
I think you've got gum or something stuck on your face. Be sure and wash your face.
You stupid!
I've often wondered if the blockade and all the publicity had anything to do with the simultaneous discovery of that blueprint mistake. I talked to the 25-year-old engineer who found it, and he said no, it was just a coincidence. It may have been, but Ray and others like her had bought enough time for the mistake to be discovered. After thousands of pages of testimony from the experts, The Mothers for Peace had been proven right.
There's an analogy that I once read that I think applies perfectly to what we're doing to ourselves. And it was a scientific, it was a research thing where they took a pot of boiling water and dropped a frog into it, and the frog immediately jumped out. Then they took a pot of water and put a frog into it and brought it slowly to a boil. And the frog adapted in increments and allowed itself to boil to death. And I think that's what has happened to us over the past 30 years, that it's gotten worse in increments. And we are like the frog who's allowing itself to die by not speaking out and taking opposition to all this.
As a scientist once said, beware of plutonium. Don't let it escape. If you let it escape, it may come back to you. Plutonium has come back. The scientists who created plutonium hoped it would never be used on people, but the bomb was used. The engineers who built nuclear power plants believed that producing electricity would make up for using the bomb. But nuclear power spread the technology and plutonium to build more bombs. The men who built more bombs believed they were providing for our security. They didn't realize that the effects of the bomb cannot be confined to its intended victims, and that even in the absence of a nuclear war, our own nuclear weapons would begin to kill us, not only in the body, but in the spirit as well. It may not be the experts who finally break this dark circle. It may not be experts who lead us out of the atomic age and into the next. It is a sobering film, and it is a depressing film, but what I got out of making it and working on it for all that time was a tremendous amount of hope for the future. Because I think that if ordinary Americans get concerned enough to act, as some of the people in the film have, and as others have since the film has been finished, then we can turn this thing around. And we can start spending our money on things that are going to actually be useful for the society rather than, killing ourselves in the midst of preparing for mass destruction.